Good afternoon. Um, my name is Traletta Banks, and I am a member of the Reentry Housing Alliance. And I have here Miss Hannah Guerrier here, and we're going to talk about evictions on rental history. And Hannah, if you don't mind just introducing yourself, telling our audience who you are.
Yes, of course. My name is Hannah Guerrier. I am a housing attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina. I'm here in the Charlotte office, and I am really honored to be here with you today.
And thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us for this event. So, Hannah, what Reentry Housing Alliance does for our audience members who may be watching who does not know, we are advocates for fair and equitable housing for individuals who may have barriers such as criminal backgrounds or even maybe evictions. And we asked you to be here with us today to just answer some of the frequently asked questions that we get from individuals who come to our website and post inquiries about finding housing. So I have a couple of questions if you don't mind answering some of those.
Mhm.
So, if you could, how long will an eviction stay on my rental history and will it ever fall off of my rental history?
So, in North Carolina, unfortunately, civil filings are publicly available forever. Um, However, many tenant screening services that landlords use to vet prospective tenants only look at the past 7 to 10 years. That being said, in North Carolina, there's no way to expunge or erase evictions from a tenant's rental history. If a landlord has filed, uh, even if that case ultimately gets dismissed, it will always be a public record that the landlord has filed. Um,
Okay. So basically, it's just kind of there until you maybe figure out something else or have an agreement with the landlord.
yeah, the best case scenario is to get the eviction judgment either dismissed or if it gets entered, um, to get it vacated after the fact if a tenant reaches a resolution with a prior landlord to wrap up whatever dispute it is. Like if landlord tenant after the judgment is able to pay the month's rent, and landlord accepts and allows them to stay, the tenant would want to go back and take that extra step with landlord to complete a certificate of satisfaction or a motion to vacate, so that the public record would show, yes, an eviction case was filed, but that judgment is no longer standing.
Okay. So, what if a person gathers the monies owed before the eviction court date and the landlord refuses the funds? Is that legal?
So landlords are allowed to refuse funds. So in that sense, it is legal. It's not criminal or illegal.
Mhm.
Whether a landlord can refuse rental funds and still move forward with an eviction is a different story. That depends on the lease and it depends on how the landlord filed for the eviction. Some leases provide that landlords can accept late payment or partial payments and still proceed with evictions. Other leases don't have that provision. Um, so there are a number of factors in there. If a tenant is in a situation like this and has questions on whether their landlord is correct to refuse the funds and move forward, they can contact Legal Aid of North Carolina. And we work through cases like that.
Okay. And how would they get in contact with you? I was going to do this at the end, but I think it's a good space for it now.
They can go to our website, www.legalaidnc.org, or they can call our number. And our main office number is 704-594-8662.
Okay.
And it's a touch tone entry. They'd hit number 4 and they would leave a voicemail for our intake staff. Our intake staff goes through those voicemails daily and follows up with each prospective client that leaves a message to see if they have a case that meets our guidelines and if the tenant themselves qualifies.
Okay. So the next question is what happens if a person gets assistance from a community agency such as maybe Crisis Assistance
Mhm.
Ministry, Goodfellas, and the agency refuses to work with that particular landlord, and so the eviction is then becomes finalized. Is there anything that that person or that renter can do to avoid the eviction?
So what I can say is, in my experience, I've not seen agencies refuse to work with particular landlords, but I have seen landlords refuse to accept agency funding. Unfortunately, landlords aren't required to accept agency funding on behalf of a tenant because the agency funding often comes with um, conditions, like you won't evict a tenant for another 30 days or something like that.
Okay.
Um, if the landlord refuses agency funding, a tenant could bring this information up with the court and see if the magistrate will stop the eviction based on landlord's unreasonable refusal, but that's not guaranteed. Again, we go back to what's in the lease, how the landlord filed. Um, and those are questions that if a tenant has that situation, they may want to contact legal aid so we can walk through those questions with them.
Great, great. So I'm hearing you saying that it's important to read your lease.
Yes. Oh,
Yes.
so important.
Yes.
It may seem like bedtime reading, but it is very important.
Exactly. You need to know what's in your lease. So, Hannah, let me ask you this. Is it illegal for a person to hold their rent, withhold rent from their landlord, even if there's some repairs that's needed? What are the necessary steps instead of withholding my rent? What are the necessary steps for that?
So it's not illegal for a tenant to withhold rent. However, doing so does put them at significant risk of an eviction. Under North Carolina law, tenants aren't protected um, as they are in other states to be able to withhold rent due to repairs. Tenants can still be entitled to what's called rent abatement, or in layman's terms, like a retroactive rent discount based on repair issues, how significant they are, and how long they've lasted at the house, and should definitely raise these repair issues in court if an eviction is brought for non-payment of rent. However, the ultimate decision then lies with the court. If the court finds that the rent owed outweighs the rent discount that they assess, the tenant could still be evicted. So it's risky for a tenant to withhold that rent um, due to the repair issues. The safer play is for tenants to pay their rent and then bring an affirmative case against their landlord for monies back. This protects them from the risk of eviction. Um, and to get rent abatement, tenants are going to have to prove a couple things in court. They're going to have to prove that a repair issue exists, that they put landlord on notice of repair issues. So is that a text message? Is it an email? Is that a letter? Is it a work order in a rental portal? Something like that. Um, that landlord then didn't fix the issue in a reasonable amount of time, um, and that they were damaged due, or that the fair market value of the home is less than what their normal rent is because of that repair issue.
So communication is important in a situation like this.
Communication is very important. And verbal notice does count as notice to the landlord, but it's always easier and clearer for the court if the tenant can bring something in that shows there was a text message, there was an email, that there's, for lack of a better word, a paper trail.
Paper trail, yeah.
Because otherwise it becomes a he said, she said
Okay.
argument that the court has to figure out.
All right.
So, not illegal to withhold rent, very risky to withhold rent because it does place the tenant in um, at significant risk of eviction.
All right. Great information. So I guess the final question is, what kind of suggestions could you give for an individual if they have a eviction on their background
Mhm.
and they don't know what to do. Like, what kind of suggestions could you give to someone who has, because we know that it stays on there unless you resolve it in some kind of way. I heard you say that earlier. So, what kind of suggestions would you give to a person? Again, I know you mentioned it earlier, but
So if tenants have evictions on their record, it does make it more difficult to find um, that new landlord that will accept them. Our suggestions would be maybe try and look for smaller landlords that may not have the same strict uh, rental history backgrounds, or able to that you're able to explain on a personal level what was going on in that. The other thing that tenants could do is, depending on what their relationship is with their prior landlord and how they left those things, going back to that prior landlord. If it's a balance issue, settling that balance and then asking the landlord to sign a certificate of satisfaction, um, or otherwise vacate the judgment that was previously entered.
okay.
Again, it's not going to erase the fact that an eviction case was filed, but it works towards getting um, rid of the judgment on the record.
Okay. Great information, Hannah. We really, really, really appreciate you today. Is there a way that you can repeat that contact information again, maybe the website information for individuals who may have questions about evictions?
Yes, our website is www.legalaidnc.org, and our phone number is 704-594-8662.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for that information. And anyone who has any questions concerning evictions, please reach out to legal aid. You guys have a great afternoon.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.